The brain is a wonder of biology. However, just like all our body parts, it gets exhausted when it's overused. To prevent exhaustion, the brain regulates some of its processes so it can conserve the energy needed to power all its functions. This means it's always seeking shortcuts, so we don't have to think every last thing through, thereby conserving energy. In reality, the brain ends up cutting corners and ignoring important information in the interest of saving precious energy. In past eras, this was helpful because it allowed us to prioritize survival instincts above all else. But it's much less useful to us now. The brain's search for shortcuts has led to two systems of thought, one focused on speed and conservation of energy, and the other on accuracy and analysis. This is something we must be vigilant about, especially when we are introduced to new information or concepts. The brain would rather save energy for survival situations, but little does it realize that it can actually cause them through flawed thinking. This concept was popularized by Professor Daniel Kahneman in his seminal book Thinking, Fast and Slow. Through a series of experiments, Kahneman developed a model that explains the separate processes the brain uses to absorb and react to various bits of information, imaginatively titled System 1 Thinking and System 2 Thinking. System 1 is fast thinking. This mode is automatic and instinctive. It's what we use when we happen upon a situation that we're familiar with and don't need to process that much, like recognizing a friend, riding a bicycle, or doing single-digit math calculations. Since it's intuitive, System 1 thinking is also associated with emotional reactions, like crying or laughing when seeing an old photograph. The main facet of System 1 thinking is effortlessness. It doesn't require anything in the way of analysis or consideration, instead using a framework of associations that we've already experienced time and time again. System 1 is a series of mental shortcuts, called heuristics, that help us decode situations very quickly. More on those soon. And because there's little time or effort used in System 1 thinking, it expends less energy and isn't terribly exhausting. You're not going to need a list of pros and cons to make decisions with System 1. Although System 1 is quicker, it's aimed at doing the fast thing versus the right thing. System 2, on the other hand, is slow thinking. This style is much more contemplative and analytical, and it's generally used when we're absorbing a new experience or learning. It's employed for any situation that requires more mental labor and effort. System 2 controls decision-making in events that could result in high consequences, like choosing a college, buying a new car, or quitting your job. You also use System 2 when you're doing something that needs more focus or effort, like driving through a foggy night, striving to hear someone speak in a noisy room, trying to recall a conversation you had a few weeks ago, or learning a complex school subject that's new to you. A skepticism and critical thinking, like the kind we discussed earlier in this book, fall under System 2, whereas System 1 thinking is fluid and instinctive. System 2 thinking is the opposite. It's deliberate, conscious, and methodical. System 1 thinking is the proverbial skydiver, where System 2 thinking is the proverbial cautious lawyer. System 2 needs time and labor to process new information, and, as a result, it uses more brain energy and can be tiring or draining. That flustered and fatigued feeling you might get while studying or reading a book isn't because you can't understand it or are bored. It's an actual biological imperative. You're using up your System 2 energy. Both systems of thinking are important to us, as we use them for different situations. Most times, you don't need to stop and think about whether to go at a green light or hug a close friend you haven't seen in a while. They're just things you automatically do, and there aren't a lot of considerations or analyses you have to make before you do them. You draw from your past experiences and make an instant decision. On the other hand, if you're reading a calculus textbook, planning a family budget, or deciding whether to ask someone to marry you. You can't just think casually or rely on your instincts to pull you through. There's a time and place for both System 1 and 2 thinking. Remember when we said the brain prefers the path of least resistance? This means it favors System 1 thinking whenever possible, and you must force yourself to take a step back and switch into System 2 thinking, which is what we're after most of the time in clear thinking. System 1 thinking is ultimately quite limiting, which is unfortunate because it's where our minds go first and foremost. It makes us susceptible to accepting things and situations at first glance, not thinking skeptically, being more gullible, and overall faulty thinking. It makes us impulsive and rash without considering consequences or implications. It makes us think dumber for things you encounter on a regular basis or have deep familiarity with. It's great. This is where System 1 thinking shines. If you have a plethora of experience with a situation, this system can indeed help you make a good decision. It's also obviously useful when dangerous elements are present, as System 1 thinking springs you into action where analysis and careful consideration would leave you dead. But in situations you're a stranger to, most situations, the instincts of System 1 are almost worthless. System 1 uses familiarity and pre-existing associations to work. Your instincts are based on what you've already known, seen, or experienced. They won't do you any good in a completely unfamiliar situation. You can't go straight from driving a car to operating a sailboat, even though you know how to change direction with a steering wheel. Those instincts won't help you when you're trying to change direction with sails. System 1 also presents certain road bumps in learning. Remember, your brain's preferred default mode is easy, some would say lazy. When presented with new material to learn, there's always a chance your brain will take a look at the information and attempt to reduce and simplify all the nuance out of it. Perhaps Kahneman's overall lesson is that we must fight our natural instinct to be lazy thinkers. But System 2 ain't always what it's cracked up to be either. We can't do it all the time because it would be impractical and too time-consuming. But more importantly, it's plain exhausting, especially if you have to keep forcing yourself to do it. Maintaining your self-control, which is what metacognition is an exhausting effort. If you use up all your resources to force yourself to do something, chances are you'll be less able to do it next time. This leads to a side effect called ego depletion. Expending the mental energy required in System 2 thinking can leave one so drained that it turns their brain into mush and prevents them from exercising it in the near future. If you're pushing yourself to read a chapter of James Joyce's Ulysses, not the easiest work of fiction to consume, a System 2 book if there ever was one, you might not feel up to it next time unless you've formed a System 1 type connection with the material. It'll just be too much. Hand over that cheap romance novel with Fabio's chiseled jawline on the cover. Ego depletion simply leads to mental fatigue, which doesn't just cause System 1 thinking. It leads to incredibly poor decision-making out of stress, discomfort, and anxiety. After a bruising day at work, it'd be understandable if you decided not to make dinner from scratch, which would probably taste better and be healthier, and just warm up something in the microwave. On a side note, additional studies on ego depletion have turned up inconclusive results, but we can still make a credible argument that consciously having to think about 10 tasks in a day is more mentally strenuous than thinking about 2 tasks in a day. What can we do about this? Well, first and foremost, attempt to be aware that there are 2 levels of thinking, and realize that you are probably using System 1 more often than not. Consciously ask yourself if you are making the right choice or merely the quick one. Ask what is driving you, truth or speed. In other words, use metacognition and watch yourself dispassionately and objectively. Draw a contrast between the 2 types of thinking and become familiar with what each feels like to you. Awareness is the first step to any type of change, because it lets you know where you need to go. Second, and this is much more difficult, is to transform your System 2 diligence and struggles into System 1 instincts through intentional repetition. Think of chess masters. For extended periods of time, they have to employ System 2 thinking to understand all the complexities of the game. But after years of experience, they've cataloged thousands of scenarios, effective strategies, and defenses. With all that information now at immediate disposal, they can make most of their opening moves without thinking, as all combinations are mere patterns they have seen before, and they only have to switch to System 2 if they run into trouble in the game. Simply put, exposure and consistency shifts us from System 2 to System 1 thinking over time. It eventually becomes the path of least resistance for you. When you can turn something that requires concentrated effort into something you do habitually, it can be dramatically transformative. The hardest part of any new thing, starting a diet, a new job, learning to drive, always comes at the beginning, when you're using System 2. But after a while, and it's usually not that long, you start to feel more natural in what you're doing, and it becomes a positive habit that you don't have to think too much about System 1. If you want chess to be less mentally taxing, it takes time to move all the strategy and combinations from System 2 to System 1. It's exactly the same way with critical thinking. You are mired in bad thinking habits in System 1. Therefore, begin to intentionally slow yourself down and walk through the steps of analytical and skeptical thinking. It will take time, but it will eventually become a habit. And a habit is really just another way of saying that something has moved from System 2 to System 1 thinking. And eventually it'll be something you just automatically do. During opportunity cost, use this mental model to stop thinking about positive benefits and instead think in terms of sacrifice and opportunity cost. All of our choices have consequences. Some are positive and some are negative. Usually, we only focus on what we are gaining. You may not realize this, but in every choice you make, you are also sacrificing something, and this can sometimes be more significant than what you are gaining. This mental model will force you to better understand the environment around your choices and help you insert some economic theory into your everyday life. Economists often refer to the opportunity cost of a resource. By this, they mean the value of the next highest valued alternative use of that resource. Here's an example to put it more clearly. Let's say you spend time and money going to a movie. This choice means you won't be able to spend that time at home reading a book, and you can't spend the money on something else. If your next best alternative to going out and seeing the movie is reading the book, then the opportunity cost of seeing the movie is the money spent plus the pleasure you forgo by not reading the book. You can use this way of thinking to get the most out of your life. Think like an economist. Weigh all of your options, and ask yourself what you are giving up when you choose one option over another. Sometimes what we are giving up is more important than what we perceive we are receiving. This can be an uncomfortable thought process for some. Sometimes people are very happy holding on to the naive view that something is free or that a choice has no consequences. We like the idea of a bargain, and we don't want to hear about the hidden or non-obvious costs. Thinking about foregone opportunities, also known as the choices we didn't make, can lead to regret. Choosing this college means you can't go to that one. Marrying this person means not marrying that one. Choosing this dessert usually means missing out on that one. If you're the kind of person who will avoid watching a news story or a documentary about a business's practices because you enjoy its product and don't want to be disturbed with the means it uses to provide that product at the cost you prefer, this mental model might be difficult for you, but all the more important. Considering that almost every decision you make has a potentially beneficial alternative, you'll never be able to avoid opportunity cost. So start thinking about what these are, and eventually you will become more comfortable with the thought process. By taking these costs and foregone chances, You're weighing the opportunity cost to help you come to the best decision for you personally. Think back to the dessert example from above. We're not asking you to sit at that restaurant for hours, weighing the benefits of dessert. Instead, ask yourself exactly what you're sacrificing for each dessert. If you get the strawberry sorbet, you are sacrificing taste for fewer calories. If you get the brownie sundae, you are sacrificing calories for greater taste. There's no correct answer. That's up to you. Which element is more important, taste or calories? Analyzing opportunity cost is a vastly different way of conceptualizing the choices in front of you. Here are important steps you should take when you are calculating opportunity cost to help you understand and come to the best decision. Step 1. Identify your priorities in life. What are your values? Our values inform all of our decision-making. If you haven't thought about your values, spend some time asking yourself what is important first and foremost in your life. Write them down. They may slightly shift over time, but once you've identified your core values, you will not have to keep returning to them with every decision. You'll just be aware of what they are. Step 2. Pinpoint and record your end goal for this specific decision. It helps to list every little thing that will factor into the decision. Here are some things to consider in this first list. What are you really trying to gain from this decision? Is this decision moving you closer to something specific? If so, what? Is this decision moving you away from anything? What values are you trying to reinforce? Step 3. Write a list of the opportunities that you will be passing up if you act upon this decision. Like in Step 2, be detailed, even if one item doesn't seem as important as another. We'll separate those out later. Consider the following. What will you be unable to do? What other opportunities may pass you by if you commit to this one? What will you regret? What will stick in your mind? Step 4. Compare your lists from Steps 2 and 3 and answer the following questions. Which of the costs from Step 3 actually matter to the priorities you listed in Step 2? If you recognize that there is an item on your list from Step 3 that isn't really important, cross it out. In Step 3, are you giving up anything important in the long run? If there's an item on your list from Step 3 that you can live without, cross it off the list. Are you taking actions that make you happiest according to your values? Are you aiming toward the correct decision for yourself? At this point, if your list from Step 3 is longer than the one from Step 2, you may need to reorient your actions toward your actual defined priorities. If you need to do this, return to Step 2 and alter your decisions and costs accordingly. The goal is that our ultimate decision should be the one that has greater benefit than sacrifice, and we need to examine the sacrifice and cost first. Let's take a look at a couple examples of this decision-making process in action. Jane is meeting a group of friends for dinner and drinks after work on a Friday. Step 1. Jane values her career, her relationship with her family, her parents, brother, partner, and child, and her friendships. Secondary values for Jane include her health, physical and mental, and happiness, and the health and happiness of her family and friends. Step 2. Here is a list of end goals for Jane. If she has a night out with friends, companionship, she will be able to catch up with friends that she hasn't seen in a while. With busy lives and hectic schedules, it's often difficult for this group to all get together at the same time. Self-care. Jane and her partner have a child, so Jane doesn't always get a chance to cut loose and enjoy herself without worrying about the needs of another. A convenience. The group outing will maintain friendships with a large number of friends. Attending this get-together means that Jane can connect with many people at once instead of scheduling many dates with individuals. Step 3. Here are the opportunities Jane is passing on to participate in the outing. Dinner and bedtime routine with her family, having a quiet night at home with her partner, catching up on a show she hasn't had time to watch in a few weeks. The following day may not be very productive if she's out late and is tired the next morning. Step 4, in this case. Based on her priorities from Step 2, Jane is going to cross out the second, having a quiet night at home. Third, catching up on a show. And fourth, not having a productive day. Bullet points from her list in Step 3. While Jane loves her partner, she is able to spend quality time with him most other evenings. Jane is willing to sacrifice the show in exchange for the time with friends. Finally, for Jane, the potentially lazy day following the night out is not a big deal. She'll push through it. So now the only item left is that she will miss out on a nightly routine with her family. And her family is very important to her based on her values. To best make this decision, Jane will have to decide if missing one evening with her family is a sacrifice she's willing to make for the evening with her friends. It's not just about what she gets as a benefit, as no decisions are made in a vacuum. Dave and his partner just had a baby. Dave's company has said he can work part-time from home so that he can spend more time with the baby. A week after he accepted this offer, he was offered a new, full-time job in a field he's been curious about, but in which he's not very experienced. Dave is going to turn down the full-time offer. Step 1. Dave values his career and his hobbies. He likes his work, but he also enjoys his creative pursuits. Dave's family and its well-being are also very important to him. Step 2. Here's a list of end goals for Dave if he keeps his part-time job. He maintains a good relationship with his current company. He is able to support his family while only working part-time. He will be able to work from his home office every day. He will spend quality time with his newborn and his partner. He will continue to care for the child when his partner returns to work, so they will not have to employ daycare. He will be able to devote some time to his hobbies because of the lighter workload. Step 3. Here are the opportunities Dave is passing on by turning down the full-time job. He is turning down a generous salary. He risks disliking spending so much time in the home. He fears he may become less motivated in work if he's not offered a challenge and he doesn't have to go into an office. Step 4. Dave values his family and he is a hard-working individual, so he will cross bullet points 3, the risk of disliking being at home so often, and 4, the fear of losing motivation by staying at home, from his list in Step 3. He will keep the second bullet point, turning down the generous salary, as this might lead to an improved life for his family long-term. To make his best decision, Dave will have to look back to his values. Which is more important, providing for a family financially or with quality time? He now has a clear idea of what's at stake. This mental model can be used in all different circumstances, from a simple evening out to a career and lifestyle change. It's a wrap. Use this mental model to foresee realistic sets of consequences and adjust accordingly. The second decision-making mental model comes from a formidable pair of brothers, Chip and Dan Heath, who are professors at Stanford University and Duke University, respectively. It is known as the WRAP methodology. The purpose of the WRAP approach is to make better decisions by focusing on the future in a way that we often overlook. WRAP works on the assumption that we are always trying to make decisions and generally think with the least amount of work possible. Unfortunately, this is more due to necessity and circumstance. Why should we conduct more in-depth thinking and analysis when we don't have to, and have other things to do? Well, we usually have to, which means we take mental shortcuts that often put us onto the wrong path. What do these shortcuts look like? They are countless. ICI, imperfect or incomplete information, seeing a pattern or causation where there is none, influenced by a strong emotion, overconfidence, fatigue, laziness, incorrect underlying assumptions or beliefs. These shortcuts create the following decision-making methodology, which might consist of the following. At most, look at most available options. Select an option, Cross your fingers and hope for the best. Even if you're in a rush, RAP makes you look past those shortcuts and do the work, so to speak, in 4 thorough steps. RAP stands for the following: 1, 2, 3, 4. Widen your options. Reality, test your assumptions. Attain distance, prepare to be wrong. Widen your options. This first step is immediately different because most people only settle for options that are immediately available and right in front of their faces. They only consider the low-hanging fruit and think in conventional terms, dismissing other approaches for arbitrary reasons. When you widen and expand the set of options you have, you immediately increase the chances of an optimal decision. This is easier said than done, because we usually think in black and white terms, yes or no, X or I. We don't consider the possibility that the answer or decision can be maybe or Z. Sometimes just below the surface lies another level of options that you would never have seen if you didn't dive in, kick up the dust, and take a serious look. Even adding one alternative choice will benefit you greatly and provide additional insight into your decision. Of course, this comes with the negative effect of prolonging a process and increasing inefficiency. But if you are looking for the absolute best option, it's imperative to widen your options. For example, what options do you have when you want to increase a company's revenue? You can look at the hard assets like training better salesmen, reducing overhead, and downsizing. These are the low-hanging fruit. What other options do you have to increase revenue? What if you looked at how happy your salesmen were, how you could motivate them better, where you are losing money in your vendor contracts, or what sources of needless spending the company engages in? The list is endless. These are the types of options you need to generate before making a decision. You might not find the very best one, but you are likely to find options that will still greatly impact your bottom line. Whatever it may be. Reality, test your assumptions. What does this phrase mean? It means to insert your assumptions and options into the real world and go through the mental exercise of what will really happen. Really think through what the future would look like and try to imagine every little detail. Often, our assumptions are plagued by confirmation bias and hubris, which means you won't be able to consider them objectively if you become attached to them. That's natural, and that's why it's necessary to go through this step. It puts your decision on stage in front of an audience full of skeptics, and the skeptics will be lobbing difficult questions and asking you to answer them. They will force you to go through every step and explain in painstaking detail what will happen next. When airplane manufacturers make sure their airplanes are ready for flight, they put the planes through a rigorous process known as stress testing, which includes flexing the wings and running the plane through physical and electric hardships to make sure that it holds up. Reality testing is no different. Try to find holes in your assumptions and options and try to determine if you can defend with actual arguments or simply mere emotional attachment. Of course, you may not have the option of the peanut gallery to ask you questions, so you have to train yourself to ask better questions and mentally visualize each step more consistently. Let's stay with the example we used earlier of increasing a company's revenue. How might you reality test your assumptions here? Focus on one at a time and playing them out to their logical conclusion. Go through each step in the process and don't gloss over potential problems by saying, "Oh, we'll take care of that when it comes." No problem. No, this is when you take care of it. Walk down that path in your mind as far as you can. If you decide to focus on training your salesmen to be more effective and persuasive, you need to look at the costs involved in that and how it will play out in the next year or two. As training is a longer-term process, then you must act like its biggest critic and ask how much increased revenue you will see, whether it's worth it, if the salesmen are capable of it, how it compares to the other options, when you can expect revenue to increase, how it can be done less expensively, and so on. Start with the 5 journalistic questions of who, what, when, where, and why, and move on from there. Honesty is required, as is non-attachment to your options. The latter part often prevents the former part. Remember, you win if you find a flaw. If you don't find any, you still win. Attain distance. Attaining distance from your option means that you must take a moment and remove yourself from the process. Otherwise, you run the risk of letting your sense of triumph and short-term emotional attachment to an option color your decision. Emotion can seep into any phase of the wrap process and completely overpower your sense of logic and analysis, especially if you've thought about a certain path or option for a long time. Over time, familiarity can be easily confused for logic and reason. Then, when you find confirmation and validation, it's natural to fall into a spiral of confidence and happiness. This is what happens without distance. In other words, take some time to sit on your decision. Sleep on it if necessary. Wait for your emotional highs and lows to subside. Return after some psychological and mental distance to see if your justifications and reasoning still make sense. They might not. When we take space and then dive back into a set of information, our brains are forced to first see the forest again, then the trees, which is important because they have been trapped in the opposite mindset. A complete reprocessing has to occur, and it's here that we gain clarity. If you've written anything in your life, you might be familiar with this phenomenon. You write something on Monday and it feels like the next Charles Dickens novel. You put it aside and bask in your triumph. When you reread it again the next day, you may find that it is barely intelligible. That's the power of distance. Prepare to be wrong. Preparing to be wrong isn't assuming that you will be wrong. It's a thought exercise in finding alternate options and evaluating how effective they are. If you succeed with your option, that's great, but success isn't really the scenario we need to plan for. Things are easy when we find success. Our plan after that is to go buy a cake and some party hats. We need to plan for when things go wrong or not as planned, because that's when we need to come up with a new approach and discover if your options are as good as you think. In other words, prepare to be wrong by creating a plan B and possibly plan C, if possible. No matter how certain you are, unpredictability is still a possibility. Plan so that you can hit the ground running instead of panicking whenever you see a small wrench in your plans. You might even begin your decisions by opting for the best plan B or over. Where might your plan falter? And what is the most likely reason for plan B to have to come into play? This is helpful thought exercise to help you pinpoint the points of potential failure, inefficiency, or lack of security, and wonder what you can do about them. To increase a company's revenue, you might have decided that training your salespeople better is the unquestioned best choice. You've done the reality test and thought through the possibilities. However, what if it doesn't work on account of something you can't possibly control or foresee? You would want to know what Plan B and Plan C are and how you can move into those seamlessly. What are the first steps so that you don't waste any time scrambling if Plan A falls short? What is going to get you closer to your goal while giving up the smallest cost? Preparing to be wrong is all about how you can adapt to adversity. And so the WRAP methodology turns what was once a binary decision, X or Y, into a three-dimensional thought exercise to ensure that you are exactly where you want to be after the fact, instead of just hoping for the best.